And we will continue today's episode with an interview with a qualified expert in nuclear energy and weaponry, Mariana Budjeryn, a senior research associate at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. Hello and welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, too. And the first question from me, is it really possible for Ukraine to create the so-called dirty bomb in modern conditions, as some Western tabloids have been alleging a couple of days ago?
Well, a dirty bomb is actually not very difficult to create for any country that has access to nuclear materials, such as, for instance, spent nuclear fuel from nuclear power plants. The thing is, a dirty bomb is not what people usually think. It's a weapon of contamination. It doesn't have these mushroom clouds and big explosions. It's not some kind of impromptu nuclear bomb. It's a weapon of radiological contamination, and it would cause disruption more than destruction. So this constant narrative that, well, if we recall, Russia first conjured up about 2 years ago in October 2022 that Ukraine is planning to create and explode this dirty bomb makes absolutely no sense at all. Yes, it is possible, not just for Ukraine, but for any country to pull a bunch of radioactive materials, attach them to, a conventional explosive device, and then explode it in a highly populated area and cause all sorts of havoc. But this hasn't really been done before, simply because it makes absolutely no sense. It's certainly not in a large-scale conventional war like what we see in Ukraine today.
So that is probably an inhuman type of weapon. It is very non-humanitarian, I would say. It will not affect anything militarily, but rather contaminate the ecology, both of the country that used the bomb and the victim country, for example. And maybe to finish off this question, is it really possible for Ukraine in the current conditions to recreate like nuclear weapons or a nuclear warhead, even one example, with the possibilities and the production facilities that Ukraine has at this moment? We're not talking about partners, but solely Ukraine and its nuclear program.
This would be a very difficult task based on the capabilities that Ukraine has at this moment. So there's two things that are important to understand about the creation and manufacture of nuclear weapons. One is that it is the technology of the 1940s when the United States first created, as part of the Manhattan Project, these weapons. So it's not some sort of cutting edge, new emerging technology that only, or know-how that only some kind of privileged few have access to. It used to be thought that only developed industrialized countries could create something like a nuclear weapon, but that was proven untrue, first and foremost by China in 1964, and then by less developed countries such as Pakistan and India and North Korea. So that shows you that, if a country is determined to develop nuclear weapons, it will find the way, it will train physicists, and it's possible. Now, the question for Ukraine is not whether it's possible today. Ukraine doesn't have important parts currently of the full fuel cycle, of the kinds of production facilities and technologies that are necessary for creating a weapons grade highly enriched uranium or plutonium to be used in this bomb. Can it build that up over some, extended period of time? Yeah, given, the investment and giving political will, probably. But it is also a very costly undertaking, not just in terms of money, but in terms of international political consequences. There's this very broad-based international non-proliferation regime. Ukraine is party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as a non-nuclear weapon state, which it joined in 1994 with the signature of the Budapest Memorandum, the famous or infamous, rather, Budapest Memorandum. And so it would take Ukraine withdrawing from that treaty, investing in and the kinds of capabilities, all of that is not achieved overnight. So that gives time for countries who are the guardians of this non-proliferation regime, including the United States, to impose costs. Certainly Ukraine would lose the military assistance from the West as a result of it, if not incur sanctions. I mean, just look what's going on in relation to Iranian nuclear program. How long has that country endured, international sanctions because it is kind of in the gray zone with the non-proliferation regime. So these are the considerations that any discussion of Ukrainian nuclear weapons program would have to take into account.
Yeah, and that seems kind of a dire consequence to me, because even the president said there's two options. Either we recreate the nuclear weapons or join NATO for security. And 1994 is probably a tragic year for Ukrainian and international security, because the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Budapest Memorandum was violated in 2014. And returning to Iran, and speaking about sanctions, would the attitude of the world to Iran change in case, or better to say, when they announce about nuclear weapons at their disposal?
Well, it's hard to predict these things. Clearly, North Korea has developed nuclear weapons and is now a nuclear state outside of the non-proliferation regime. And it's certainly still under sanctions, and it's certainly still viewed as a, adversary of South Korea and the United States, South Korea being the ally of the United States. So the relations there have not improved, let's put it that way. But certainly Ukraine is also not North Korea, not Iran in terms of not posing otherwise any threats to, the Western world or, the kinds of goals and values that the civilized West is pursuing. So this would be certainly a different situation than with North Korea and potentially nuclear Iran. But it is still rather likely that certain negative consequences will ensue, not to mention that certainly Russia will do everything in its power to undermine, to sabotage Ukrainian nuclear program. Again, it takes time. It's this time of vulnerability while you're developing the capabilities and building up, the facilities that are necessary for creating the bomb. That's the most vulnerable time, when those who don't want you to create nuclear weapons have a capacity to undermine it and to sabotage it and to stop it in its tracks. Now, I do understand in a way why President Zelensky keeps bringing up this NATO or nuclear weapons kind of choice for Ukraine. I think more than an actual credible threat to develop nuclear weapons, this is to bring home the general geopolitical and security predicament, the situation in which Ukraine finds itself, that it has foregone, it has given up an option to develop its own nuclear weapons in 1994 with the accession to the NPT. But on the other hand, it got no other security guarantees, real guarantees like what NATO allies receive under Article 5 of the Washington NATO treaty. And so it's in this security vacuum, and it clearly in a security, power abhors a vacuum, as we say in political science. So when there is this kind of gray security zone, it becomes a red light for an aggressor. And this is exactly what we see playing out in Ukraine right now. So I interpret the words of President Zelensky as kind of emphasizing this security predicament and bringing it very clearly to Ukraine's Western partners to say, listen, this problem will continue. It will persist unless something is done. And that something most likely, and in the best case scenario, has to be NATO membership with, very robust security guarantees to Ukraine. Otherwise, if we are left fending for ourselves and constantly being exposed to this Russian threat, then we should be able to pursue all means at our disposal to defend ourselves. And those means might include, certainly not now in the, next couple of years, and maybe not even in the next decade. But if this is not solved, Ukraine will constantly be revisiting this option of nuclear weapons.
Well, what I see right now, we lack both time and security here in Ukraine to develop our own nukes or to join NATO. And if you even watch at the map, there's literally one last neutral country between Russian space and the West. Even Belarus has been occupied, so it is Ukraine, the last remaining country not in the NATO alliance in the Baltic Black Sea, like this axis. And maybe the last question to you. Even in the science fiction book Dune, they have non-proliferation nuclear treaty and nukes. But do you see a future without nuclear weapons? Can we, as a human being and as human race, change from this security destructive power of nukes? Can we go to something more civilized and that is not threatening to blow up the entire planet?
One certainly hopes so. And these have been efforts afoot in the international relations, international public space since the nuclear weapons were created. So the disarmament movement, and especially the efforts of the scientists themselves, the scientists who were part of creating this bomb, their conscience has been bothering them ever since. They launched all sorts of initiatives to try to advocate for global nuclear disarmament. And it seemed for a brief moment that after the end of the Cold War, when this nuclear standoff between two nuclear superpowers was over, and it seems that the reason for nuclear weapons have dissipated, that there might be a real chance for global nuclear disarmament, and that unfortunately hasn't happened. Over the 8 decades that nuclear weapons exist, they managed to work themselves into national security structures and doctrines of now 9 countries, right? And it's very difficult to extricate them. These countries rely on their security for nuclear weapons and the deterrence that these weapons offer. And certainly, there have been now a renewed push for global nuclear disarmament with the adoption and coming into force of the treaty on the ban of nuclear weapons, on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, TPNW, that just came into force in 2021. None of the nuclear states joined that treaty. So it's really a community of non-nuclear weapon states that are rather upset with nuclear powers for continuing to rely on these weapons for their security while denying them to others. In the end, the global kind of nuclear structures, global nuclear order is rather discriminatory and unfair. And I think it will come it will come to bite the nuclear states ultimately, because countries are not stupid. They don't want to be disadvantaged at the hands of nuclear powers. And this war in Ukraine is the prime example that a nuclear power gets away with a lot. So can mount a full-scale conventional aggression against a non-nuclear weapon state, all the while issuing nuclear threats and blackmail to the rest of the world to try to prevent assistance to this country. So this is certainly, I think the value of nuclear weapons as tools of international politics is very much on the line on the battlefields of Ukraine. Not just Ukraine's independence and Ukraine's future, but the future of nuclear weapons in general.
Well, let's call that atomic injustice or atomic inequality. And we hope that on the example of Ukraine, we will see that you either join an alliance and help each other, or probably create your own nuclear weapons for deterrence or other non-nuclear variants, as President Zelensky has advised at the Victory Plan. Thank you for this insightful interview. We are very glad to have you at our studio, and it was a real nice talk about the nuclear topic. Thank you, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
And that's all for today. We hope that you like our episode today and the interview too. Be sure to like and share this video, because it is your support that really matters for us. Have a nice day.